The day I signed the adoption papers, I thought the hardest part would be convincing a frightened little girl that she finally had a home. I was wrong. The hardest part came 3 hours later, when my mother looked me straight in the eyes and said, "If you bring that child into this family, don't ever call us mom and dad again." The room went silent. Even the waitress standing nearby froze, pretending to wipe down another table while secretly listening. I stared at my parents across the restaurant booth, wondering if I'd heard them correctly. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "Oh, we're very serious," my father replied without hesitation. "You've worked your entire life to build a future. Now you're throwing it away for someone else's damaged child." Someone else's child. Those words hit harder than I expected. I glanced toward the little girl sitting beside me. Emma was only 8 years old. Tiny for her age, with chestnut hair tucked behind her ears and enormous gray eyes that rarely blinked. She hadn't spoken a single word in almost 2 years, not since witnessing something so traumatic that doctors called it selective mutism brought on by severe emotional shock. She simply lowered her head, her small fingers tightening around the stuffed rabbit I'd bought her after we left the courthouse. She understood more than people realized. She always did. "She isn't damaged," I said quietly. My mother laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Every social worker says these children come with baggage. Violence, trauma, behavioral issues. You have no idea what you're inviting into your life." "I know exactly what I'm choosing." "No," my father interrupted. "You're choosing guilt. That's different." For years, I'd dreamed about becoming a mother. But life had unfolded differently than I'd planned. A broken engagement at 31. Several heartbreaking miscarriages over the next few years. Then doctors gently explaining that another pregnancy would carry serious risks. For months, I mourned the future I'd imagined. Until I volunteered at the Children's Center one rainy Saturday. That's where I met Emma. She sat alone in a corner, quietly assembling a 1,000-piece puzzle far beyond what most adults could manage. Other children laughed and played nearby, but she never joined them. She simply worked, patiently, methodically. Every time someone tried speaking to her, she'd offer the smallest nod before returning to the puzzle. When I complimented her work, she looked up for exactly 3 seconds. Something passed between us in that brief glance. Not trust, not yet, recognition, like two lonely people noticing each other across a crowded room. I returned the following weekend. Then again. Eventually every Saturday belonged to Emma. We never talked. Instead we painted pictures, built puzzles, fed ducks by the lake, read storybooks aloud while she turned the pages. Little by little, she stopped flinching whenever someone walked behind her. She began sitting closer. Sometimes she'd even slip her tiny hand into mine while we walked. The social workers noticed. "So does she do this with anyone else?" I asked one afternoon. They exchanged glances. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "Emma doesn't willingly touch people." That answer stayed with me all week. Months later, they asked whether I'd ever considered adoption. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked across the playroom. Emma was drawing a house. Not an elaborate mansion, just a simple little home with smoke curling from the chimney. 3 stick figures stood outside holding hands. One was obviously a child. The other 2 were adults. There were no faces, only hands connected together. That drawing made the decision for me. The adoption process lasted nearly 14 months. Background checks, home inspections, parenting classes, psychological evaluations, stacks of paperwork taller than my coffee table. Through it all, my parents remained skeptical. At first they simply questioned my decision. Then they criticized it. Finally, they outright opposed it. "You're letting emotion control your life," my mother insisted repeatedly. "You don't even know where that girl came from." "I know where she's going," I'd answer. Home. That only made them angrier. Looking back now, I realize something else. Every single time I mentioned Emma's biological family, my father became visibly uncomfortable. His jaw tightened. He changed the subject. Sometimes he even left the room. I assumed adoption simply made him uneasy. I never imagined there was another reason. Back in the restaurant, the tension had become unbearable. Customers nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. My mother folded her napkin with perfect precision. "If you walk out that door with her," she said coldly, "our relationship ends today." I waited. Part of me hoped she'd soften. She didn't. Instead, My father reached into his wallet, removed the spare house key I'd given them years earlier, and slid it across the table. "You won't be needing us anymore." My chest tightened. Those two people had raised me, helped me through college, comforted me after heartbreak, celebrated every promotion, and now, they were erasing me, over an 8-year-old child who had already lost everything once. I looked at Emma. She wasn't crying, she wasn't trembling, she simply stared at the rabbit in her lap. But I noticed one tiny detail. Her thumb rubbed the rabbit's worn ear faster and faster. She was anxious, terrified, waiting to see if I would leave her too. That single movement answered every question I still had. I stood. I picked up the adoption folder. Then I reached for Emma's hand. She looked up at me cautiously. For one terrifying second, I wondered if she'd pull away. Instead, her tiny fingers wrapped tightly around mine. "I choose my daughter," I said. No shouting, no dramatic speech, just the truth. My mother's eyes hardened. So be it. Without another word, she stood beside my father. Together they walked toward the exit. Neither of them looked back. I watched through the restaurant window as they climbed into their car and drove away. Just like that, gone. The silence that followed felt impossibly heavy. Emma gently tugged on my sleeve. When I looked down, she held out her stuffed rabbit, offering it to me, as if she thought I needed comforting more than she did. The gesture nearly broke me. I smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "You keep him." She hugged the rabbit tightly again. As we walked toward the parking lot, I promised myself one thing. No matter what happened, she would never wonder whether she belonged. She was my daughter. Forever. What I didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire confrontation from across the street. A tall man leaned against a black pickup truck, his weathered face hidden beneath the brim of an old baseball cap. His eyes never left Emma. When our car disappeared around the corner, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a much younger Emma standing beside another man. The resemblance between them was unmistakable. The stranger folded the photograph carefully before whispering to himself, "They finally found her." Then his expression darkened. "And if those people threw her away again, they already know too much." He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and followed us from a distance.